Each and every one of us has that concern to preserve our personal dignity, our sense of self, our value. But as I watch myself go through the day, I see I have placed myself in a very challenging situation. I am seeking my worth, my value from the outer world. And yet I sometimes also feel my worth and value are threatened by the outer world. What happens when I go inside, deep inside? The feeling of going underground, mining for gold within the cell. Touching the core of the self, that sense of self that is impervious to the shifts and changes of the outer world. That sense of self that feels stable, constant, resilient, powerful, deep, and rich. Affirming that intuitive feeling that what I actually seek is inside. When I look for my worth outside, the begging, controlling, manipulating, gripping, I experience temporary results, but it also feels very fragile, easily threatened. But when I experience this richness within, it feels solid, that nothing can take this away. It is intrinsic to me. Things can change on the outside, but this deep value of the self is eternal, imperishable, simply waiting to be mined, experienced. And nothing of the outer world can feel it threatens my self-value or personal dignity. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Good evening and welcome to Interview with Raj Yogi. Tonight's topic is being self-defined versus creating boundaries. This has been on my mind quite a bit now and again, but this idea of creating boundaries, I'm sure you might have heard it in many different contexts, but I hear it a lot in the healthcare field. In terms of wanting to make sure that no one's overstepping, I suppose, your private quarters, space. Maybe that's the case also in fitness, but providers making sure they don't burn out, interactions with clients and patients, this whole thing about creating boundaries. But I know you've mentioned this quite a bit in terms of the lens of Raja Yoga. And if you'd like to just sort of just give some, I guess, introductory thoughts regarding that, because it may not feel like it's useful to souls are relevant.
Om Shanti. It seems like it's a bit of a double-edged sword that we're walking around with. On the one side, we are very much taking our sense of worth, value, and energy from the outer world. And then on the other side, we're feeling threatened by the outer world. So we say we want to set boundaries. So it's a bit of a quandary that we're in. We want to take from the outer world, fill up from outside, but we also feel that it is going to empty us. So this makes things very confusing. And I think it just sort of gets worse and worse because, the more that we're taking, but it's becoming more and more unstable out there, then the more fragile it feels as a source of filling up. And yet we don't seem to have other options. The most obvious, of course, is to go inside. But we are challenged to figure out how to do that. And at this point, we have such a deep habit from taking outside. So it's that, it's running a bit of that saying, the biting the hand that feeds. We're taking from the world, but also feeling threatened by that same world.
It's interesting because just when you were sharing, I was thinking about something that comes up often in this study about giving sorrow and also not taking sorrow. And perhaps then it is that quandary. Then how do I not take sorrow if it's not trying to create these separation of some sort? Maybe it's physical for some, but oftentimes it's actually something deeper.
There was a song that had a line in it that always really stayed with me. I think the song's called The Tin Man. It doesn't matter, but the line in it was only to discover that you're defending empty space. So, this concern, it becomes more, actually, we become more and more insecure about this. The idea that we're actually empty, and this is why we're actually so affected or feel so threatened by what's going on around us, because we're so dependent or influenced. But if I dedicated my attention to figuring out how to fill up inside, I would be less and less threatened. So we definitely observe this in the experienced yogis within our organization. It's quite funny. I was thinking about this the other day as well, that the really senior yogis who've over a long period of time made sincere effort, they really belong to everyone. It doesn't feel like they have any boundaries. The ones setting their boundaries actually are their assistants, their right hands that are concerned, So I was again remembering this very, very short, just seconds of interaction. It happened again recently, but where we had to go and escort one of the seniors, and they themselves, the senior was very happy to take the hand, be escorted, but their assistant was kind of trying to create boundaries, and so I've noticed that those who really fill up, nothing can really threaten their personal dignity or value because they've really filled up inside with that. So they're actually very generous. They're sort of like doctors without borders. They're very generous in giving.
So what inspired this topic today? Because this morning's class for Raj Yoga students was that if I can surrender to the identity of being the soul, then I can let go of all sorrows. But a part of that too was if I can really truly belong to God, which is connected, because as I continue to study, I realize such a deep connection between a sense of actually identifying with who this being is, but actually enhances my sense of identity of who I am. And oftentimes, souls are quite afraid when it comes to who is God in relationship with God, because they feel they might lose like a lot without maybe even realizing what that is. And so that's why I found this topic really interesting. And I know for quite some time, even when I first took the course, you were talking so much about being able to detach. But souls still have their own ideas, of course, from past experiences, previous births, of what that means without it feeling like you're cutting things off, which is this whole thing about creating boundaries.
In general, the objective of Raj Yoga is to completely shift the way we operate. That's really the objective, because how we operate completely 100% determines whether we're happy or not. It's got nothing to do with anything outside, anyone or anything. It's completely connected, correlated to how am I operating. So trying to shift that operating from being very outwardly focused, taking from the outward world these desires, control, what I want to happen, operating on that model versus operating from a very contented, full place. That's really the objective of Raj Yoga, to the point that we say it's about changing from a human being to a deity. And the term for deity is Devta, one who bestows, gives. So that's the objective. Within that, one of the signs of whether I'm shifting is if I feel threatened by the outer world, so I set up boundaries, or I'm completely unaffected, so there's no boundaries needed. That's a sign of whether or not the operating system is shifted. And it's connected to the basic formula, that whatever's happening outside, does it define my experience? That's the old operating system. So that means I will use all of my energy to try to manipulate the outer world in such a way as I assume would make me happy. And that's boundaries would be part of that manipulation. These things make me sad. I take sorrow from them. So I need to set up boundaries. Obviously the other model is where I'm full. Nothing's going to take anything from me because I'm not needing anything from anything. So it's a completely different way of operating. So a huge part of our connection to God is that he acts as a brace, a source, everything. We want to surrender, make him our world, so that I stop using the old operating system. So boundaries comes within the old way of operating.
One of the things I really appreciate about the inner fitness sessions we used to have, now it's called practical meditation, offered at the academy, but often a spiritual topic that is used that has a bit of a, I guess you can say, a play on words in terms of fitness. And I've always enjoyed when it's just the introduction of how this looks like in a physical way. When you're talking about, creating a strong foundation, or you're talking about core strength or something like that. And then looking at the spiritual parallel and seeing that perhaps maybe souls don't realize that what they're looking for isn't actually those external things. But I guess that's why for many years, I felt that there was that connection between being self-defined or a lack of being self-defined. Therefore, you create boundaries. Because I was thinking of a balloon. When a balloon is completely deflated, anything can encroach, so to speak, in its original space. But when a balloon is full, nothing can get in that sense. And I'm using it as a very, very physical example, but the reason why I was just like, there's a definition of self that needs to be so clear, experienced. And you're saying that, it has to be something that makes me feel like I'm content and full, that perhaps maybe souls don't see that that's really what the issue is. It's that they don't even know what it means to be self-defined. Because again, that's actually a word that's used, I would say it's quite common out there. Well, aren't individuals self-defined? But we're looking now at a spiritual lens. So what has that experience been for you in terms of being self-defined as who you are, and how that has transformed just the way that you are on a day-to-day basis in a world where we all seem to want to feel like we belong somewhere?
The word we often use is self-realized, to realize the self. And, so I'm uncovering or discovering who I've always been, what I've always been. And I think I'm very aware of two parts: that I can realize myself, and that's wonderful. In those moments, we have glimpses of those moments, I feel completely liberated. So boundaries isn't even on my mind, but it's not stable. So it's not so much I need boundaries, but I do need protection from God, not against anyone or anything, against what's been accumulated inside. The falsehood that's been accumulated inside, the resistance that keeps pulling me out of that self-realized state. That's what I need. It's nothing to do with anything. If I find that, someone made me feel unworthy, if that thought ever comes into my mind, it is not that person. I don't need to set boundaries against that person or what they're doing. There was something inside of me that was activated, and my relationship with God will melt that, so that really I'm not affected. So it's really protection against, it's as if the enemy has been locked inside the house with me. So you can set up as many boundaries as you want, but they're already in there. So I need something to protect me from, if you will, these inner dynamics. And that's God.
In terms of souls have actually expressed this, that in different contexts, they mention, where I work, there's just so much stress, I seem to lose myself into it. Or, I've been in a job and I've completely lost my sense of self, or I'm in a relationship and I've lost my sense of self. And perhaps that's a part of too, where souls are afraid of what is spirituality, where you lose a sense of identity. And so it feels like it's such a a different way of operating. When you were just sharing, I was thinking about integration, to be able to, that's a huge one, to remain in this reality of being a spiritual being in the midst of physicality, and to be able to let go of these propensities for boundaries, and to really trust, what does it really mean to be defined as a soul?
In terms of the stress and the instinct to put up boundaries, and yes, the remedy is to realize the self, but in fitness, there's a principle that if someone hasn't set the foundation properly, they can get away with it for a while. Perhaps when they're lifting light weights or doing low reps, they can get away. But when you start to add on more weight, add on more demands, then the lack of the proper foundation comes through and they experience stress. So when someone says, there's more stress at work, so actually it's always been there. It's just now that, as things start to ramp up, it becomes very evident, but it was always there. It's not that the work created it or the situation. It was, the foundation was already off. And if anything, those situations help to bring it to light, if I can interpret it that way. So again, it's not that I need to get busy setting boundaries because things are starting to get out of control. As I say, the problem was already there. But what I do need to do is realize the self and get busy filling up.
This aspect of Raj Yoga, and I know you've mentioned it in the past, and if you can share your experience, that when you had shared that when I have that connection with the Supreme Soul, I actually feel a deep sense of self.
We are very affected by the company we keep. So the example we were using this morning was I was in a meeting, and one was in Australia, one lives in the UK, but at the time of the meeting, she was visiting her sister in Ireland. So her sister came into the meeting just to say hello. And then there was myself. So you have someone from Canada, someone from Australia, someone from the UK, and someone who's been living in Ireland, from the UK originally, but in Ireland for about 3 decades. And so at one point, the one from Australia, of course, in Canada, we feel we have no accent. But the one from Australia said to the sister, just popping in to say hello, from UK now based in Ireland, said, "Oh, I can tell you've spent time in Ireland. You're starting to sound Irish." And it was interesting. I listened. I said, "Yeah, she does have." I thought she sounded very British, but yeah, there's a little bit of an Irish look there. And she said, "Yeah, no, when I'm here in Ireland, I sound Irish. If I spent just a few weeks back in the UK, it'd be gone." This is how deeply we're affected by the company we keep. So God is truth, real. If I'm in the company of that being, and the only being actually who stays in that state constantly, we lose ourselves, at which point we try to set up boundaries, but we're defending empty space. But this is the only being who constantly stays in a real state. So when I'm in that soul's company, their company literally, the power of that soul's purity, their company literally pulls me into a real sense of self as a spiritual being. So I feel there's signs, of course, the deep peace, the deep silence, the deep contentment. These are our intrinsic or real state. So we feel that the depth of the self, the maturity of the self, we feel all of that when we're in the company of that soul, simply because we're colored by the company we keep.
So we started a little bit late just because we had some technical issues. So I'll squeeze in one more question. I was remembering actually when I was working in peds oncology, so children with cancer, and the burnout rate was tremendously high. Especially the 2 years I was there, that was actually when there was. Sorry, we're having some technical issues again. Okay. So there were many who had what we say left the body, souls who left the body, children who passed away. So there was a tremendous burnout rate. But I remember hearing from a lot of the nurses, specifically the nurses that are saying, I just don't want to, care for, have the feelings of care for my patients anymore because, it's just too painful. So I just want to just be, distant from them, don't try to establish a relationship with them. And the reason I'm using this example, because it feels like it's just one of the many individuals in the world who feel a sense of hopelessness, not being able to feel that they don't have to shut down, but to be able to be a sense of self, to be in situations, and that's an extreme situation. What has it been like for yourself in terms of you don't just become cold and distant, but your sense of self as you've been in this study in situations where many feel that they could be drained, or as you said, that something could be taken away from them?
So again, the problem is already there, but in an extreme situation, it can come to light. But it's the same problem everyone has. It just comes more to light, or it's more illuminated in that situation. So that real state that we experience when we're in the company of the Supreme Soul is called detached and loving. And so the irony is that the more I'm setting boundaries, it's actually a sign that I have lots of attachments. I'm very deeply influenced. So I'm setting boundaries to hold on to some shred of what I perceive to be my heart. But in fact, the love, the generosity, the abundance of the heart comes from not being affected by staying in that benevolent state, really in that self-realized state. So the detachment, I think the boundaries actually is the cold form of detachment. Truth is a different form of detachment that expands the capacity of the heart. So I'm not so affected by the truth things that will be happening around me, that everything is temporary. Things are going to come and go. People are going to come and go. I'm not affected by that. So then the natural generosity of the heart is constantly available to me. Setting boundaries is actually this other form of detaching, which will shut down the heart. So I have to do something inside, get the real self back, which is detached, that is completely free, and therefore constantly loving. And then no boundaries are needed.
Well, thank you, Judy. I feel that when souls actually really learn what it really feels like, that there can really be a deep shift inside. So we'll have a reflection right now.
I go inside, listening to the call of my own heart. And it's making really just two requests: to have unshakable love for the self, and to be very kind towards others unconditionally. that would make my heart happy? What kind of operation do I need to undergo on the heart to achieve that state? And who is the surgeon? I know it's a matter of the spirit, not the physical heart. And no amount of physical manipulation will respond to the call of the heart. There's just one surgeon, the source of divine love, the Supreme Soul, whose heart is always whole and healthy. The operating room of that being is sweet silence, where the only sound is truth. The experience of what is eternal is the instrument to heal the heart. Whenever I go into that silence, come close to God and experience the truth, I can always feel the heart expand, fill up with deep, deep, unshakable peace. A peace that it feels can never be taken away. Deep peace within the heart, such that when I come back into this physical realm, I feel more resilient, more royal, more real, and very loving towards the self and others. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. I think there is a question. Not sure if it's directed towards us, but I think it's probably directed towards you. It's just, how long have you been in this study?
Oh, it might be you.
Maybe you can, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think 18 years.
30.
But it's been a very powerful journey in this study. So just wanted to let souls know that this coming weekend, this coming Sunday, is World Meditation Hour. So that happens every third Sunday of the month. Online session for English, also in Hindi, is online, but also available on site at the Inner Peace Center. Also, we have for the next month, just because if you want to save the dates for your schedule, it is English Raja Yoga Foundations on the Wednesday evenings at the Inner Peace Center. I believe that's 6:30 to 8 o'clock. And then there's a Hindi Raj Yoga full course over 2 full weekends. And that's the second and third Saturday, Sunday of May. So there's a lot of drop-in sessions on site and online for English and also in Hindi. So please visit the website or Eventbrite for more details. Thank you for joining. Om Shanti.